Good afternoon and welcome to today's slave food presentation. Today is Daughter's Day, and we would like to say the name of Breonna Taylor and acknowledge the continued crisis that faces the African American community in the US and abroad. Today, the doctors tackle the twindemics of COVID-19 and influenza, so you can learn what you need to know to stay healthy during the flu season. Thank you for joining today, and please feel free to share the links, invite your friends, as well as to host a watch party for today's segment. For those of you who are new to slave food is the project of two African-American physicians who explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in the African-American communities, irrespective of income. They discover eating a whole food, plant-based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. Our doctors are Dr. Columbus Batiste, who is a cardiologist who practices out of Southern California, and Dr. Eric Walsh, who is also a physician who is practicing in Connecticut. They met at Oakwood College University many moons ago and have maintained a friendship that has led to this project. Welcome, Dr. Batiste and Dr. Walsh, to your show.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah.
Man, so I know many of you are probably looking and wondering, well, I thought they said there was going to be another Dr. Wonder Drake, and we wonder where she's at. But Dr. Drake likely right now is in the midst of battling what we're planning on talking about today. So, the conversation will be centering around what America and the world has really faced over this past year, which is the coronavirus, and right now, the impending twindemic. And so if she's able to join us, we look forward to having her join the conversation. But if not, I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Eric, how was your week?
Busy fighting the same coronavirus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to start today's show with some questions, and we'll have you guys just kind of share with our audience, what is the twindemic and why is it important?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll kick off. I mean, this twindemic, it's parallel to the pandemic, and what this is it's the collision, the joining of the coronavirus, which we all have heard about. We've heard about this kind of transitioning from Asia into Europe and into the United States. And this past year, or week rather, we passed 200,000 deaths inside the United States as a result of COVID-19. But what happens every fall is the flu season, right? And so right now, we don't know exactly what will transpire between this collision between the coronavirus and between influenza. And that's what the twindemic is. Twindemic is really this collision between the two.
So what are the differences between COVID and influenza?
Well, influenza is an annual pandemic, honestly. Every year, a new strain of the flu virus circulates the globe and gives pretty much flu-like symptoms, which include everything from fever, chills, body aches, can give you some GI symptoms. I always tell patients the flu is a whole body infection, not like a head cold where you sniffle and sneeze and maybe cough, but the flu, you can cough, runny nose, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting as you ache and shake for days. The coronavirus is actually not very different in the way that it can present. One of the big differentiating symptoms we've discovered is this loss of taste and smell. That's one that really is a bit different. People with coronavirus also do seem to have more respiratory problems, especially once it becomes significant in terms of difficulty breathing and difficulty, even taking deep breaths sometimes. They can get a pretty bad cough. But it is a very unpredictable disease. I mean, I see patients test positive who have absolutely no symptoms, and I see other patients who are literally they have to go straight to like the hospital and probably wind up in the ICU because they can't breathe so bad. So I mean, we've talked about people with seizures, stroke-like symptoms. I mean, it runs the gamut, the kind of symptoms you can get from coronavirus.
So
And
it
that, well,
sounds
that's
like, go ahead. Go
I was
ahead.
going to say that's the crazy part about the coronavirus, and maybe in part it's because we didn't really search it out for influenza. But what we're finding with the coronavirus is we're finding as well that people when you're asymptomatic, it can still tremendously impact you. It can
Yeah.
impact your heart and lead to this inflammatory state, leading to what we call myocarditis. It can lead, as you mentioned, to all of this diffuse systemic clots that lead to strokes and heart attacks
Yeah.
and
DRC.
toe issues and so forth that happen there. And this is what we're seeing as a result of these two. And I think the real issue with the Twindemic is we don't know. You all probably have heard about the whole issue of flattening the curve, making sure that we do what's necessary so that the healthcare system isn't overwhelmed. And so what the concern is with Twindemic is the fact that if we hit the flu season when we still haven't come out of the coronavirus wave that's there, we may just flood our healthcare system, and that's what's concerning, and that's what leads the level of concern from public health officials and physicians.
Now, I know from the COVID, we know in terms of the almost 200,000 deaths, we're seeing that is striking in terms of the deaths of Black and the brown communities more so than other communities. Is that something that you guys have also been able to track from influenza? Like, do we have more Black and brown people dying from the flu than than whites?
That's actually a good question, and I can't say I've ever seen data that supports that. Not that it may actually happen as you think about it, but I think the reason that this virus is different is that the way that it enters the body is through the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, the ACE2 receptor.
Okay.
And that receptor is very much connected with kidney function, blood pressure. It's in your lungs, affects heart function. So it's different. And so if you have certain pre-existing conditions and you get the coronavirus, it like sets you up to have more problems. And if you're in like what I keep calling a pro-inflammatory state, especially if you have a diet that is pro-inflammatory, you probably also set yourself up to have more problems from the coronavirus.
Okay.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, to push that forward just a bit more, when we look at this thing called the endothelium, right, that's a lining of the vessels. So taking a few steps backwards, what I always tell patients is that just imagine if you go to your hardware store, Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, Target, and you buy a garden hose. It should be flexible. It's not rigid, it's flexible. But you let that water hose bake in the sun, in the Sahara Desert, in Palm Springs, it will become rigid over time, inflexible, right? And so that's what happens. It's a marker of the atherosclerotic process that occurs there. And so when that endothelium becomes scraped, becomes damaged on the inner lining, that's like the Teflon pan. Nothing normally sticks to it. Now things become permeable. They can infiltrate that area in the attachment. And so folks who are prime at having endothelial dysfunction tend and seem to have a greater risk for these events. And we know this endothelium is tied to diabetes, it's tied to obesity, it's tied to all of the maladies. We know that there's a relationship between endothelial dysfunction as well as those events here. And I think like Dr. Walsh said, that may be the great connector between coronavirus as opposed to influenza. But we do know that folks who have influenza are at risk. Those who are at greatest risk for hospitalization and adverse events are those who are older, those who have chronic disease too as well, of diabetes or kidney failure or heart failure, and those of really young ages too as well. So these are devastating diseases that are there. And I think one of the biggest things from my perspective that 2020 has taught the world is that we have unseen enemies that are in front of us and that are seeking to attack us and take our lives. And that's in the form of these flus. And you can think in terms of spiritual realm, but this is specific to the flu, and that's what can be problematic. So we have to arm ourselves every single day in our method to fight against this.
Yep.
So with regard to vaccinations and the importance of vaccinations for, let's look at least, the influenza first, is that something that you recommend for your patients?
I do. I mean, and I give the flu vaccine to a lot of people. There's some people who don't want to get it, and I tell them, if you don't work in healthcare and you're not in a situation where you're going to be exposing yourself to at-risk people, and you don't want to get it, if you get the flu, you might be sick. Get sicker and stay sicker longer. So I do recommend it to those who want to minimize the risk of getting the flu, because the flu vaccine overall does save more lives and what we call morbidity. People get less sick. The coronavirus vaccine is a tricky one. It doesn't exist in a finalized form yet, so there's a lot of distrust. A lot of conspiracy theories about it. I mean, people are telling me they think it's the mark of the beast. I've had people tell me, there's something in it called Luciferian, and it's the patent number is 060606, which is 666, and so they're never going to get this vaccine. So this vaccine is going to be a tricky one because you're going to have a hard time convincing some people to get it. And then, of course, there is the reality that no vaccine has ever gone to market as fast as we're trying to get this one to go to market.
Exactly.
So, all conspiracy theories and stuff aside, it is different. I mean, normally it takes years to test a vaccine to make sure it's safe.
Right.
And we saw already with the one from AstraZeneca, I think, they had one person that got really sick in one of the stages of the human trial. So, I would be all for getting it. I just, I'm at that point still where I'm not sure I want to be the first one to get it. So, it's going to be tricky because a lot of people are going to have that feeling like, okay, I'll get it, but let me wait till March and see how everybody fares if they start giving it out in November.
Right.
No, absolutely. When I look at vaccinations, they're important, and so we have to look at why do people get vaccinations in general. And so part of it is so in that way your body's defense mechanisms. And so the first defense mechanism is your skin. It's the first one that kind of protects you and everything. But you have this whole immune system, and think of it like the military. The military, they wear their uniforms so they can recognize each other and they can recognize who's the enemy, but you have to identify the enemy. So part of vaccination allows the body to identify an enemy that won't kill you first. So typically you have a kill version that allows your body to get robust and get its defenses up. The problem is that it doesn't mean that, like Dr. Walsh said, that it's foolproof. You can still, some people may be subject to it. There can be different versions, but in general, you may prevent the mass slaughtering, right? By arming yourself. And that's really the benefit. If I can reduce those who become critically ill, who require hospitalization by giving the vaccination to enough people to stop the spread of it, and this kind of gets us into the whole idea and concept of herd immunity, then I'm providing value. And that's really where it's at. Now, I think the big question that's come into play is, okay, the timing, how long? Do we have a track history to know that it's safe? Have we gone through the appropriate steps to make sure that I'm not the first or the last?
Absolutely. And then you have to also, in terms of dealing with African Americans, you have to look into the backdrop of history, right? Yeah. So in terms of just the relationship between Blacks and physicians, and, in terms of these procedures or vaccines that we've been used essentially as lab rats in some instances to test out what's out there before everyone else. So we've got the historical, backdrop of systemic racism involved in these vaccines, especially for something like COVID. So how would you address, how would you respond to someone who is concerned from the Black community with regard to these, even the flu shot, and as it relates to any kind of vaccinations?
Well, I would say, there's two sides to vaccines. If and when you were to say, it became very difficult for Black people to get vaccines, I think most of us would be upset because vaccines, nothing is, truthfully, besides hygiene itself, nothing has really saved more lives than vaccines. I mean, we don't even think about smallpox anymore. Smallpox had like a 30% mortality rate.
And chickenpox. Right.
There's a lot less chickenpox, but I mean, chickenpox, most people would be okay, but some people die from chickenpox and measles. Maybe some of our viewers remember diseases like polio. I remember being in elementary school and having a teacher who had polio as a child. She was older and, still walked with a brace. Vaccines are why we don't deal with a lot of that stuff. Some people say it's just hygiene, but you needed both of them to work together to eliminate some of these threats. And so, these diseases became preventable with vaccines. So, and you're right. I mean, you look at things like the Tuskegee experiment and other things. There's a reason many African Americans do not trust the medical system. But ironically, the people who actually avoid vaccines the most in this country are usually upper middle class white people.
Okay.
They're the main ones who actually try not to get their kids vaccinated. So I get the connection there. But I would say if a vaccine has been proven safe, I would still recommend it. And there are parents who don't like getting their kids vaccinated, or they want to change how they vaccinate them. That's up to you. There are some forces to try and make you get your child vaccinated. I don't do that. That's not what we do. But vaccines have helped a great deal. And Black people have benefited, I believe, in general, from the fact that there are vaccines, because if you live in closer quarters with less space, some of these diseases would actually spread even faster and more prolifically. So, I know we have a bad relationship with the medical system, but if we can make sure we get good vaccines, overall they are for benefit.
Right. And that's go ahead. I'm sorry, Doctor.
No, I think that's one of the situations, is the fact that there's no doubt that there is a legacy within our country of disparities in healthcare, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I think the first step is to recognize that. I think that there has to be a level of trust that has to be engaged and understanding. If we look from the hysterectomies that were performed out of the guise of appendectomies, if we look at, like you mentioned, the Tuskegee experiment, if we look at the experiments that were performed on prisoners, if we even look within just recently now, they were performing hysterectomies out of those who are the dreamers, who are, and as what's being said. And so there's a level of mistrust that's there. And so I think the first level is communication, and trust has to be built. And that comes by being very transparent. So number one, the first thing is, okay, what's the likelihood? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if I don't get this? And I'm obese. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I have 3, 4, 5 risk factors. I've been in and out the hospital. What's the likelihood that this could be detrimental and take my life? What's the likelihood that as myself, as a provider, taking care of individuals who are sick, that I may have an asymptomatic, it be infectious and be asymptomatic? And so when I look at that, I have to weigh the pros and cons of my actions.
The risks
to make a
risk versus the benefits.
That's what everything boils down to determine whether or not this is beneficial for me or not. Because if I end up in a hospital and now I'm intubated, and now with my other comorbidities, I have a slow recovery, will I be worse off than had I taken it? And now I have a mild form of it. Now, as it relates to the safety, that's where transparency comes in. That perhaps as healthcare providers, we need to share research and say exactly what we're saying, that what the expectations are for providing this to patients. But we can never ignore the travesties that have taken place, because when we do that, we minimalize it, we marginalize it, and we say, it's not important, that's in the past. We have to recognize it, embrace it, so in that way we can all receive the care that we need to receive.
Now, there's a term that is going around, I know I've heard it a lot, the herd immunity, the community immunity.
Herd immunity.
Okay, have you guys heard it called community immunity? Also, okay, is there a difference between the two, and can you explain that a little bit more in terms of what they are?
I've never heard of community immunity, so if you want to explain, I know what herd immunity is, but what is community immunity? I'm not sure. Maybe Dr. Batiste knows.
I think they're very. I think I've heard them colloquially mean the same thing.
Yeah, during the trials with Dr. Fauci, I think Rand Paul or whatever or was asking, and he was calling it the community, and Dr. Fauci was very upset in terms of him trying to push that agenda forward.
Well, let me jump into this. So it sounds like it would be the same thing. What that says is, look, if you just let two ways to look at it. If you just let the virus run loose in society, enough people would get it and develop immunity to it. So to the point where there's not enough people, like let's say 65% is where we find herd immunity works. After that, it's very difficult for it to spread because there's not enough people that have never had it for it to really spread around and make a problem.
Okay.
Problem with that with coronavirus is we still don't know if after you have it, if you actually develop immunity. We have no proof of that right now, which is another reason why the vaccine is going to be really tough to see how they prove that it actually gives immunity, because you can actually get the virus and be sick, and there are people arguing you don't necessarily develop immunity. So, and there are people who have tested positive more than once. So we're still in the very. I mean, you think this whole thing is like 6 months old. Smallpox has been around for decades. We understand smallpox. We understand chickenpox. We understand measles. We don't really understand this one yet. So herd immunity is what you would want, which is why they're trying to come up with a vaccine so that you can do an artificial herd immunity. But I don't know right now. We have no way to know if anybody's getting immune at all.
Yeah. And the way I this kind of struck me the other day when we were someone was asking me about herd immunity. And I think of it in terms of chickenpox. You brought up chickenpox. So imagine if you had the family, the Brady Bunch or the Cosby Show, whomever it may be, and you had a group of 8, 9 family members. Now, if all of them were to get the actual chickenpox, they're all going to get sick. They're all kind of down for the count at the same time that people are sitting there putting calamine lotion, and who's going to do that? Because they're all sick. Now, as opposed to them having a vaccination, they don't manifest the disease, but they build the immunity. That immunity, now you introduce someone who has the disease to one of them, they're protected so they don't transmit it back to the person who's at greater risk. That's the goal of herd immunity, is that it acts in a sense as a shield. So it happens eventually, either way, vaccination or not. The fallout, like in 1918, of no vaccination can result and be catastrophic in terms of the amount of deaths that occur, the amount of the impact on the hospitalizations. And so that's where, and so it's a calculation that scientists and physicians have come up with, that in order to determine exactly how many according to the population and the risk of spread and the contact and everything else, to figure out what percentage of the population needs it in order to build that level of immunity. Not to say that it's impossible for someone to get it, but that it helps reduce the spread tremendously, and it reduces the impact on the healthcare system.
Okay, great. So Dr. Walsh, you have a question in the chat window from Bob Griffith, and he wanted to know, how can incomplete immune system be less of a risk than a more robust immune system, kids versus adults?
So part of the reason that we think the children, I think what he's asking is, children's immune systems are not fully developed. They've not been exposed to as many things, so they do not have the memory T cell antibody arm of their immune system as developed as an adult would, because as an adult, you've been around longer, you get exposed to stuff. Here's the reason we think children don't get as sick. It is because, for the same reason, they probably are not having as inflammatory a response to the virus. The way that this, and I have the slides for this, and maybe at the end we'll quickly flip through the slides so I can show you guys some of this stuff. But this virus literally works by causing a lot of hyperinflammation. That's like the last phase of the infection. And then there's what we call a cytokine storm that happens. Now they're talking even about a bradykine storm. So this thing, again, we're still learning, but that inflammatory phase is really what happens and creates the plugging up of the lungs and all of the things that happen. And that's why, isn't it funny? All this time they say you can't treat this thing. Initially, they told us not to treat it with anti-inflammatories. Just a few weeks ago, they came out and said, oh, some of the cheapest drugs we have, steroids, can stop this virus in its tracks. What? Yeah, just IV steroids in the hospital stops in the tracks. Why? Because it turns off all of those inflammatory processes in the body. Children just aren't as good at it, so that's probably why they're not getting as sick from it. And one of the things, I'll just throw this in there, we'll talk about hopefully before the program's over, is this is why stress, we talk about stress a lot in the Slave Food Project. The release of cortisol actually impacts your ability to stop inflammatory responses. And so being stressed out will actually make you more hyperinflamed and actually make it worse for you with coronavirus. One of the reasons it's very nerve-wracking in a 24-hour news cycle that people have been, this panic has been created around the virus, because literally stressing about the virus probably makes you more susceptible to having a bad outcome from the virus.
Right. Dr. Peace, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think the only other thing I would say is I know there's been some subtle hypotheses really in terms of the endothelial status of
Yeah,
kids versus some of the adults that may make them more resistant. So we know
Mhm.
that children are harborers of the virus, but they don't manifest the disease quite as much. So when they track the nasal pharynx of kids, they found that the viral content is very high, right? Like if
mhm.
someone who's higher than someone who's the sickest person inside the hospital, but yet they don't manifest the symptoms. And so we see that this is possible in many instances, and they've done tests, and we allude to it in other presentations of dropping in certain types of viruses, rhinovirus and other types of coronaviruses into the nose of individuals. And the higher your stress level, like Dr. Walsh was saying, the more likely and apt you are to have the manifestation of the symptoms, to manifest the disease, the ill effects from the
Right.
virus, despite having the same viral load. That the less social contacts that you have, nice, good social interactions with individuals, intimate relationships, you're more inclined to have the same sort of thing. So that's been proven and shown before. Other thing I would add, and Dr. Walsh is right, and he pointed this out, I want to make sure I stress this, is the fact that where like things like some of the steroids were shown is shown in those sick patients that yeah, it actually does
Yeah,
help them, but not in the community. So don't go out and take
yeah, yeah. Don't
steroids
do that.
thinking it's going to help you
Don't go to another
at
country
all.
and bring back some steroids.
Yeah.
But the other thing is this, one other thing stress does too is it actually blocks the release of immunoglobulin A in the mucous membrane. That's specifically it. So there's antibodies that are supposed to exist in you to catch the virus. When people are stressed out, that antibody kind of goes away. As we talk about in the big slave food talk, when you are under chronic stress, your body reprioritizes things, and your immune system is often drops in priority. So this is just a plug. I mean, maybe we'll talk more about stress a little later on. But also, kids are often somewhat less stressed. But I think the endothelial factors definitely. I hadn't thought of it that way. Definitely a component. And kids' immune systems probably just can't mount the same inflammatory response that this virus triggers, like the exact one that this virus triggers.
There's a question over here by Lyra who wants to know what are the components of the vaccine, and I don't know if that's something you guys can answer.
I want to say I wish I knew, but I guess I really don't want to know yet. We don't know because it's still under development. And here's the funny thing: people are getting a vaccine around the world. Russia's already started vaccinating people. I've heard China has said they're only vaccinating certain high-risk people and their medical people. But one of the vaccines they created, the World Health Organization gave them an emergency use thing for, and they're using it. So, I mean, the vaccination is happening even as we speak. I don't know that I would trust those vaccines, but right now we don't know what's in the vaccines, and you're using techniques to make this vaccine never been used before. So, I really don't know what they're doing.
Okay. Arthur Hunter would like to know, what is the best protection from this COVID-19 or the flu?
So I'll jump in with this. What's interesting is that now he doesn't work for us, nor is he involved in the Slave Food Project. But I love the comments by Dr. Fauci. So Dr. Fauci, they asked him like, what's some of the best prevention for the coronavirus? And this was maybe about a week or so ago. And guess what he said? He spoke about rest. He spoke about your nutrition and exercise is what he spoke about as some of the best tools to protect yourself from the coronavirus, right? So we know that this is transmitted by through the air for the most part. That's the greatest. There was a great deal of concern about it being left on the objects and cleaning, and not to say don't clean, but the greatest amount is really through the air. And so even so much so, there was this back and forth with the CDC, and some on the outside side may have been saying, well, what was all the commotion over the aerosolization versus droplets? Well, the reason why is that when you speak about droplets, and we've all spoken, talk with wet and close speakers, right? Where droplets kind of go close to you, right? But they drop fairly quickly. Now, when it's aerosolized, it can travel. That means that agencies and restaurants and companies, they have to now look at their filtration system of their air. They have to look in terms of the filters. They have to look at the airflow. All these things become important because if we say it's aerosolized, that means that it can linger and people have the propensity towards still coming in contact. Now, we know there's something called viral load, which still plays a role inside all of this. So in terms of protection, wearing a mask is important because you're protecting others. That's why wearing a mask is important too as well. And that becomes an issue. And then also still hand washing. Why hand washing? Because you oftentimes touch your mouth, your nose, your eyes, and these are all portals of entry for the infection as well. So I would say the combination, your lifestyle, hand washing, and mask wearing during this time period right now.
Okay. So again,
Dr. Walsh is saying you're on mute.
Let me throw in something. Let me throw in something else real quick. So to be even more specific, we know the foods that we've been promoting on Slave Food are very much protective. So we may get more into it later on, but I just want to mention right here, onions, garlic, dark berries, dark grapes, leafy green vegetables, sunlight, are all things that are going to protect you. And Dr. Batiste talked about rest and exercise. We know that rest is when your immune system does most of its good work. You have to get good sleep for your immune system to work well. If you're not rested, again, your body will not prioritize your immune system. And of course, exercise gets great circulation, releases stress, and helps you to be able to perform better. So I just want to mention that. We'll get more depth about those foods later on, but I just want to throw that out there as an answer to that question, that there are specific foods we know actually are protective and specific foods that are detrimental, which we'll talk about more in a minute as well.
Okay, and so there's a question about the viral load. Dr. Batiste, if you could explain what that is and what that means.
Yeah, just think of it like the concentration. So if I walk through an area or let's use a bad food. Even though I try not to use things like bad food. Think of it like Kool-Aid, right? If you put like just put a few crystals of this sugar sweetened powder beverage inside your water, it's going to be diluted. You may not even taste much of the flavor. Now, if you concentrate that and add many more scoops, you concentrate it and the flavor's there. Well, the same thing happens with this virus. If I'm in an environment where the virus is there, it's being projected out, and I'm in close proximity with another individual who has the inactive infection, that means I'm constantly being bombarded with this virus. If I'm 6 feet away, yes, I may get one or two viruses that permeate into my nose, but I'm not having multiple that are just constantly there. And so hence the idea of space, 6 feet. Hence the idea of being outdoors where you have the breeze and you have different things of that sort that are changing the trajectory of them from impacting you. And that's really what we're speaking to, is this persistence of viral load from a time standpoint and from a concentration standpoint.
And let me just add in that the reason that to understand that viral load is important is because this is why when people go to bars and parties or even a religious activity and it's densely populated with people, and in close quarters, and you stay in that small space for a long time, the amount of virus you're actually going to bring in is a lot more. I'm much less worried about the grocery store where I walk past people. I'm wearing my mask, but even if I wasn't, just walking past someone, it's far less risky than sitting in a bar, let's say, for 2 or 3 hours, where the air is, you're breathing in the air of other people. You'll breathe in a lot more virus and get a lot sicker a lot sooner.
Or even if you're singing in a choir.
Yep.
Right.
I'm singing is one of the other things. Yeah. Singing,
including the birthday song. So when my birthday comes up, I don't want anyone singing happy birthday to me all close proximity there either. All right. Because we know they did a test with the birthday song, happy birthday, that it's once again that transmission. Yeah. And there's testing that's been done showing the transmission there.
And he's just dropping a hint. His birthday is September 28th, in case anybody, wants to send them over any presents.
No, it was not to give HIPAA. It was not to give HIPAA information. That's HIPAA. That's all right. That's HIPAA. All right.
Well, anyway, so is that also why like restaurants or outdoors provides also safety for people?
Absolutely. If you're sitting outside and breeze is blowing, and especially if the sunlight is directly hitting where you are, the ultraviolet rays of the sun are not good for the virus itself. So being outside is inherently protective. The problem is, like the flu season, We go inside for the winter.
Yes.
This is cool,
Even in
right.
sunny Southern California, you spend more time inside when the wintertime comes around. And so for that reason, gives that, and the fact, I'm gonna give one of the things that is actually very dangerous when you're trying to fight a virus is high sugar intake. And I want you to notice that there's a correlation, not just with the winter cold and going inside and every year a flu season hitting, but there's also the correlation to Halloween. Everybody all at once eats a lot of sugar. It's Halloween. I tell patients all the time, Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas, and then the Super Bowl party. I mean, like there's like boop, 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 boop. And all winter you're inside and there's a lot of high sugary foods that are being eaten that actually collectively across the United States collectively drops our immune systems together, and then we're all inside, and hence you get a wicked flu season periodically, but every year you get a flu season.
Okay. Yeah. And it's wicked, you say.
Wicked. If working in the clinics, it's wicked.
It is. It's a brutal thing. And the small microcosm of what can potentially happen is that we saw with the fires, it drove everyone indoors because of the poor air quality on the West Coast. And so when we saw this everyone kind of driven together, there was a rise in the diagnoses. Right. And so when we meet that with influenza, potentially, that's where there's harm. Now, the hope is the fact, like in Southern Hemisphere, because of vaccinations, because of the efforts to reduce, to improve their lifestyle and decrease some of the other aspects, they didn't see such a stark flu epidemic like what they had in prior years. It was markedly lower for the influenza.
Okay. So what role does vitamin D play in infectious diseases?
I'll jump in and talk about vitamin D. Vitamin D is critical to the function of the immune system, brain function, and other things. But what we've discovered with this particular pandemic is that there is a strong correlation, and we have slides on this as well, between people with low vitamin D levels and severe coronavirus infection and symptoms and even death. It is very much related and correlated. Whether or not it's cause and effect, you could argue, because we know that vitamin D is lower in African American. The darker you are, harder it is to get it. All Americans are prone to having low vitamin D just because most of us spend so much time inside. For African Americans, obviously worse. Darker skin makes less of it get through. So there is a direct correlation. So one of the things we've been telling people is to make sure your vitamin D levels are in the normal range. What we found though is that we think normal range is like 30 to 40 for 45, whatever it is. Africans, they've done studies on Africans who spend most of their time outside, especially before Western influence, and didn't wear a lot of outer clothing. Their normal range of vitamin D is over like 110. Staggering. Here's what they then found. They then found that if a woman breastfeeding has vitamin D levels over 110, her baby does not need vitamin D supplementation. At that level, her breast milk will actually have vitamin D in it. The epiphany I came to just recently when I had my vitamin D level checked and I went and did some research on all of this, the epiphany I had is the normal range we even give people is still probably way too low. And we should probably all be trying to get our vitamin D levels much, much higher than we right now we consider it. So vitamin D, if it at its maximum proper levels, probably are incredibly protective, probably difficult to get to for a lot of us because of our environment, but is key to keeping yourself from getting sick.
Dr. Batiste, did you have anything you haven't yet?
No, absolutely. I mean, vitamin D it's quintessential. I mean, I'll be honest. So there's always been a relationship between vitamin D and chronic disease, vitamin D and immunity is what's been shown. But recently, but the question is the supplementation. Does the supplementation offset the disease, which is really what we're looking for? And so it's this, we get different pieces of research that tell us different things as it pertains to chronic disease. But there's a growing body of evidence that tells us as it relates to immune support and influenza that there's a lower incidence of the events of infectious events from a symptom manifestation with vitamin D. And so that becomes extremely important in terms of having that daily amount of vitamin D that's there. And everything Dr. Walsh said is absolutely correct. When I try now, I'm very intentional in my efforts to do green exercise, right? So I can get some sunlight, that I can make sure that I'm having at least an hour of good sunlight once a week where I can absorb 20 to 30,000 units. And so that's the ideal, is sunlight, right? Because with sunlight, you're activating the skin. When you activate and convert in the skin, you also help release nitric oxide, which can help dilate the vessels, lower your blood pressure. You produce the vitamin D that then becomes active, which really helps in terms of prevention of cancers and all the other remedies that are there. So the true power is with having measured amounts of sun. I don't want to tell you to go out there and you end up getting skin cancer and you say, the docs told me to go in the sun, but I'm saying measured and being very aware, right? In terms of the activity. And that's what's important.
Is there a recommendation in terms of time and unit? And then also the second thing is using sunscreen going to prevent your vitamin D?
Yes, so absolutely. So sunscreen will reduce as far as the impact because it's obviously screening out. So the longer amount of time that you're there, it requires much longer periods of time. Okay. The recommendations for the amount really truly depends upon your skin hue. So it's not okay for me just to say African Americans because we all know we're in different tones and colors and everything else like that, right? And so it differs according to the person. I think the key thing is having your levels measured. Yeah. Go and have your levels measured. Take the added steps of finding out, are your levels markedly low? Because guess what? Even if you live in sunny Caribbean and you're indoors all the time, you're not getting the sun. You're not getting enough. And so you may need to go ahead and supplement. And that's where it's an important aspect.
And let me just jump in there. The sun also does some good things for your mental health. Giving you some stress relief and so forth. The sun is powerful, and even it's not just with nitrous oxide, but if you're eating green foods, the chlorophyll in you, certain rays from the sun still go through you and actually interact with the chlorophyll and does some powerful positive things inside your body. Time-wise, I'll say this: a very fair-skinned person, like a white person, can actually in 15 to 20 minutes in a short sleeve shirt and shorts probably get a pretty good daily dose of their vitamin D. For an African American, it would be like an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, as Dr. Batiste said. So just to give you that. But I think what Dr. Batiste said is critical. Get it tested, and then that way you have you can try and summarize how much sun you should get. So
do you guys so you're recommending supplements for those who can't get it directly?
I do. I would. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
If you live in Alaska and it's dark for 6 months, yeah, you probably should do it. And I mean, a lot of us live in Chicago, New York, Connecticut. The sunlight in the winter is minimal, so you may need it even if you could get outside.
All right, I've got a question from Leslie Young, and she wants to know: is it true that vitamin C can aid in the prevention as well as the recovery of COVID? That's vitamin C.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead and take it. Go ahead and take it.
You guys want me to answer? Because
so so there is a lot of anecdotal literature and so forth as it relates to vitamin C and the high dose infusion inside intensive care units for various viral infections. I have not seen repeated research as it relates to COVID and the coronavirus for saying that it will reverse it or prevent it or treat it thoroughly. I have seen some anecdotal, but not enough for me to say, absolutely, this is what should be done. This is the high dose. And Linus Pauling was one of the first to really kind of begin the process of really exploring this. We did a lot of extremely major work as it pertains to vitamin C. We know that there is profound benefit that's there. We know that it's even heightened when you have the whole fruit as opposed to it. And that begins to transition into really the role of food in really combating infectious diseases. And so we know that the combination of the phytonutrients and micronutrients in combination in the absorption can be profound in terms of vitamin C levels, as well as many of the others, the zinc and the turmeric and curcumin there.
Yeah, so and I would just jump in and say there's such a benefit to whole foods to get these vitamins and minerals. You got to remember the supplement industry is an industry, so they want you to think you have to take these supplements to be healthy. But there are compounds in an orange that man has not discovered yet that are probably absolutely beneficial to our health and aid vitamin C in the work that it does. And so for that reason, making sure you're eating the right foods is important. The other thing is, if you're eating foods that are nutrient sparse, you can't make up for it with supplements because you have to. First of all, some of the ability to absorb the nutrients from food is usually going to be a whole lot better than it will be from any pill that is created, no matter what they tell you. So the whole food really is what we want people to focus on.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that there's no correlation with vitamin C in COVID. Although everyone is like, if you have a cold, you got to get a lot of vitamin C, but there's no direct correlation with COVID for vitamin.
I haven't seen that. I've seen it with vitamin D. I have not seen it with vitamin C. Not that it doesn't exist. We know zinc actually helps in this situation. Okay. So eating zinc-rich foods, and we have a slide somewhere on all the foods that are rich in zinc.
Why don't we put those up now? Because we've got about 15 minutes. So if you guys are ready to go to some slides, maybe we can go to some of those.
All right, let me see if I can. You out at Columbus?
Sure. I'll go ahead and try and put up a few slides here in just a moment.
But while he's doing that, let me say, so it's the compounds that we're looking at are things like resveratrol, which are found in the skin of dark grapes, blueberries. We're looking at things like curcumin, which was mentioned already, in curry. So all the Jamaicans out there, the curry you're eating is absolutely good for you in terms of protecting you against the virus. Garlic and onions we mentioned earlier. Very, very good foods. Garlic especially, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial. I did research when I was in college on its effects against fungus. So all of these foods, these are just a few of foods. Never mind, leafy green vegetables also have a lot of the nutrients we need to be protective as well.
Okay, and you were saying about zinc. What did you specifically say about zinc?
So zinc, what's important about zinc is that when zinc gets into the cell, it's very difficult for the coronavirus to replicate itself. And this is where one of the things that we're often not told. Zinc actually needs to go into the cell. Go back a slide there, Columbus, if you can. Zinc has to be, if zinc is inside of the cell, well, what happens is, go back a couple more. I don't know if we have hard to tell when we don't have I can't see the next one. But see, so here, we'll just use this slide. When zinc is inside of the cell, the virus is not alive in the sense that we understand being alive. It has to hijack the machinery of the cell to make more of itself. What we found is that when zinc is inside the cell, the zinc blocks the virus from being able to do that. Now, this is one of the reasons they talked a lot about chloroquine. Chloroquine actually does help zinc get into cells. And this is why there's going to be probably be a debate for a long time over it. But what we do know is nature has its own way. And one of those things is quercetin. And if you look, it's not just quercetin. If you look at that blue arrow there, there are other compounds that do the same thing. They open up zinc ionophores and allow zinc to go into the cell, which makes it so the virus just can't do much damage. You can go forward, Columbus. And so we talked about curcumin. We can skip this one from curry. That's in curry and turmeric. So these are foods that are rich in zinc. Beans, green vegetables, asparagus, spinach, mushrooms,
and not the ones that grow outside.
We still staying away from the ones that grow outside for right now. Get it from the grocery store for us, please. Next slide. And it's whole grains. So we won't go through all of what's on here, but you can see quinoa to whole grains. A thing of raw oats is rich with zinc. And this is all protective against the virus. You can go forward, Columbus. I don't think it's a little tricky there. And then quercetin, we won't get too deep into that, except to just show you that there's another compound that people supplement a lot. But here are the foods that you can find it in, because it assists zinc in getting into the cell. So it's really important. If you eat high zinc foods, you also want foods that are high in quercetin. So we can go to I think we have a list of the foods. Yeah. So one of the highest is elderberry. So what you were noticing since this pandemic started, there are a lot of elderberry infused gummies in the drugstore now that you can buy because of the high quercetin concentration. But it's not just that. Red onions, white onions, cranberries, green hot peppers, kale, blueberries. It's in the pigment of these plants. So red apples, lettuce, pears, spinach are all high in it, but elderberries seem to be the highest, and that's why there's like a newfound craze. I found elderberry jelly, I found elderberry gummies, I found all kind of elderberry stuff recently.
Yeah, be careful about those gummies, Dr. Walsh.
No, I get them from CVS, not from my man around the way. We won't get into the mushrooms, except to know that mushrooms actually they're actually researching mushrooms in their ability to fight coronavirus, specifically that there may be mechanisms and stuff that mushrooms have. Next slide. And of course, the green leafy vegetables. I think we just list some other foods that you got to make sure you're getting in. Green leafy vegetables. A green juice is one of the most potent things that you could do to really help yourself with something like this, because it's so easy to absorb a lot of the green nutrients from a juice. So a green juice in the morning is a good thing to have.
Yeah, and then what's great about the green leafy vegetables, even you look at things like broccoli sprouts, and studies have shown that they actually enhance your natural T killer cells, one of the first lines of defense that's there. And so there's huge power as we look at the whole foods, real foods, plant-based foods. And that's why we promote this. And it's not that it's a cure-all for everything, but there's so much power when we choose to eat unprocessed, unrefined fruits and vegetables.
And Lana
Robinson wants to know about pomegranates. You didn't mention that.
Is that pomegranates are phenomenal. Absolutely. Pomegranates are phenomenal and definitely should be a part of it. I was going to say about the green juice that if you want a real hard green juice, have Dr. Batiste make one for you, because he don't even need to add apples and nothing. He drink it straight. He told I gotta add some fruit to mine. I can't take it. But
his juice is hard. You say he got a hard juice.
His juice cure cancer all by itself.
Listen, you gotta get it in. Playing around. All right.
Change the palate.
That's right. So
well, I don't see any other questions on the from the chat. So I don't know if you guys had any closing statements.
Yeah, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I would just say, this pandemic has shown us a lot. I talk a lot about in some of my messages at church and stuff. It's shown us how fragile the world is, not just how we are as individuals. I mean, Major League Sports is nothing like it was. It's back up now, but months without it. Travel, nobody's traveling. Major airlines. I'm a big Delta Airlines fan. They're struggling to stay alive. This whole thing also tells you that you do have to trust in something bigger than yourself. And for me, having a relationship with the Creator is what is most important in times like this, as a way to reduce your stress. Trust in God, because stress is really, really an enemy right now. And there are a lot of people in panic mode. I see it all the time in the job I'm doing, how panicked people are, sometimes for no good reason at all. And it's funny, I see some people who should probably be panicked and they're not panicked either. But bring your stress levels down, get your rest. A 30, 40 minute a day walk is like medicine. I can't emphasize the importance of exercise in a time like this enough, especially before the winter chills come in parts of the country. Get outside and get some exercise in the sunlight. And then, of course, whole foods. Somebody mentioned pomegranates. We mentioned nuts. We've mentioned seeds, sprouted foods. We just started sprouting a lot of beans and stuff. I mean, it is so amazing how much better you feel, the clarity that your mind will get, because this pandemic is reminding us that we can't trust the systems around us. People are talking about just the vaccine. People are waiting for a magic pill. People are thinking the hospital's going to save them. Let me tell you, you have got to really go back to basics. And one of the places you got to go back to basics on is diet, exercise, rest, taking care of yourself, and trusting in God.
And just to add to what you just said, the guest we were going to have on, Wonder Drake, I'd heard her say in one of her talks that there's so much in the world that we cannot control at this point in time. But the one thing you can control is what you put in your mouth. So, making those types of choices can be very beneficial, and, to exercise that control can help you a lot.
Yeah. And, I'm going to add to, I can't really add much to the components of sleep and being spiritual and exercise and the food and so forth. But I'm going to add two other things in there, which are extremely important. And one is the mindset, the power of the mind. And so we know the mind is extremely powerful in terms of how you choose to think. And so you have to think that you will be healthy. You have to think that I will engage in getting the foods that I need. And you have to put your mind to it. You have to commit every single moment, not just at the beginning of the day, but throughout the day, because there's so many options for us when we're out there. We have to choose love over hate, especially in the context of this world right now. It's a choice of what we have to make. We have to choose to as well. I'm going to throw something in there. We have to choose to laugh. We have to choose to have humor. That humor has been shown to reduce the stress hormones, to dilate the vessels, and helps embolden your body to fight. Lifestyle health is not just one thing. It's not just food. We have to get off our soapbox with the food, right? It's not just exercise. Got to get off the soapbox with the exercise. It's all of these things together, additive and anchored together by a belief is what's important. So that's what our goal is to encourage you, to let you know that yes, you can, it is possible, and that we have to, what are we doing? What do we say? It's hashtag feeding the strength to fight.
Yep.
That's what it's about. Feeding the strength to fight injustices, feeding the strength to fight this flu, this disease that's out there. And that's really our goal.
And let me just throw in there real quick. I'm reading a book right now recommended by the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country. This is how I got onto it, called Nonviolent Communication. And it speaks to how we speak to each other. And I want to say to everyone out there, your relationships matter. Because we have what we do know is that there's a lot of strength in your relationships, and it's really important at this time to do that. So I want to tell people to avoid saying social distancing and say physical distancing.
Absolutely.
So that you stay socially connected to the people that will give you strength. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Judy McCullough and the Miami Temple SDA Church. They've joined us tonight, and just want to thank them for tuning in. I'll talk to them more tomorrow, but I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank Pastor and everybody down there in Miami.
Fantastic. Well, did you guys have anything else?
Well, I will encourage everyone to, number one, like the page. I encourage you to go on, share with your friends, anyone that you think could benefit from the information. Definitely share it. We plan on bringing hopefully important content that's important to you. And tell you what, I want you to log in, go on Facebook, go to the Slave Food page. If there's a topic you want us to cover, you're like, you know what, we want the doctors to cover and bring in the guests and talk about women's health. It's coming up in October. To talk about men's health in Movember and November, right? There's things that you want, shoot a note to us. Let us know. We want to be here as a source for you to bring you information and allow you to integrate the principles of health that can help you be the best version of yourself that you can be, as well as for you to learn about a disease process and how to get the appropriate screening. But we appreciate you. We thank you and look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes. So next week we won't be back here on Friday, but we are doing a talk for the Pine Forge Academy, and that talk will take place on October 3rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we will have a link available. And then we also have a very special guest that we'll be looking to tell you guys more about October 9th. Did you guys want to share a little bit about that now, or would you like to talk about it later?
Sure, we can give an intro with that. You know, right now it's NBA season. We know that the Lakers are hopefully shooting towards their another championship, and we're hoping to bring on an NBA champion, a 4-time NBA champion, to join our show on October 9th. And so definitely let folks know, share, and we'll get you more information, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.